The FBI has had many cases involving particularly dangerous criminals who managed to escape justice. These individuals are accused of brutal murders, rapes, arson, and organizing criminal networks. Their actions shocked the public and served as a reminder that even the most dangerous individuals can remain in the shadows for years. Here are the 10 most wanted criminals by the FBI today. David Alan Bonis was once seen as nothing more than a typical American man. He had a modest home, lived in a quiet neighborhood, and maintained the image of someone who posed no threat to anyone. To those around him, he blended into the background, just another face in the crowd. But beneath that quiet exterior lay a hidden darkness that would eventually shock investigators and leave a chilling mark on the FBI's most wanted list. Bonis was accused of committing one of the most disturbing crimes imaginable: the rape of a child. The details of the assault remain sealed to protect the victim, but the charges alone painted a horrifying picture of betrayal, violence, and irreparable damage. It wasn't just the act itself that made the case so shocking, it was the way Bonis vanished afterward, slipping away before law enforcement had the chance to bring him to trial. After the accusation was formally issued, federal authorities moved swiftly. They expected to arrest him with minimal resistance. But when agents arrived, Bonis was already gone. His disappearance was clean, precise, and alarmingly effective. He left behind no trail, no credit card transactions, no calls, no surveillance footage capturing his escape. His phone was off, his vehicle unused, and his digital presence suddenly erased. It was as if he had never existed. This wasn't the panicked flight of someone caught off guard. It was the disappearance of a man who had anticipated every possible move the authorities might make. As the investigation deepened, agents grew increasingly unsettled. They couldn't understand how someone with no formal training had evaded capture so thoroughly. Investigators began to suspect that Bonis had planned his escape well in advance, perhaps even before the abuse had been reported. He may have studied law enforcement tactics, prepared multiple exit strategies, or even cultivated connections to help him disappear. Some believed he might have fled to remote communities with little to no law enforcement presence, places where cash is still king, records are minimal, and strangers are rarely questioned. Others feared he had fled the country entirely, using forged documents or help from individuals sympathetic to his cause. Years passed, and the case grew cold. Bonis's name remained on watch lists. His image was circulated across state lines and broadcast on national platforms. Despite this, not a single credible sighting was confirmed. People claimed to have seen him, but all leads fell apart. Analysts at the FBI concluded that Bonis either drastically changed his appearance or lived in total isolation. The absence of any meaningful evidence became its own kind of proof of how calculated and dangerous he truly was. No trial ever occurred. Without the suspect in custody, the court could not proceed. There was no cross-examination, no victim testimony, no closing statements. Justice, in this case, remains suspended. Despite the gravity of the crime, no financial reward has been announced for information leading to his arrest, a fact that has drawn criticism from advocacy groups. Still, the case remains open, and federal agents continue to monitor for any sign of activity. The question remains not just where he is, but who he has become, and whether the monster behind that new identity will ever emerge again. Until he is found, the threat remains. M. Tari Dixon was never a man who stayed in one place for long. Those who encountered him described a restless energy, a constant movement between cities and states that made him difficult to track even before he became a wanted man. He had ties in Charlotte, Atlanta, Stanford, and New Rochelle, often drifting between them with ease, blending into each location without drawing much attention. On the surface, his life seemed fragmented but unremarkable. A man who perhaps couldn't settle down. But this pattern of transience would soon become a key part of a far more disturbing story. Everything came to a head on October 26, 2022, in New Rochelle, New York. According to witnesses, what began as a verbal altercation in a public area escalated rapidly. The atmosphere grew tense, and before anyone could intervene, a single shot rang out. The victim, a man whose identity was later confirmed by authorities, dropped to the ground, dying almost instantly. The shooting was quick, but its impact was immediate. Panic spread through the area as people fled or called 911, yet by the time emergency services arrived, Dixon was already gone. Investigators quickly identified Dixon as the prime suspect. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and prior associations pointed to him as the shooter. What followed was a stunning display of calculated evasion. Within an hour of the murder, Dixon boarded a train bound for Stamford, Connecticut. From there, he switched to a bus heading south to Atlanta and later surfaced, at least temporarily, in Charlotte, North Carolina. This chain of movements was not random. It appeared carefully planned, executed with the precision of someone who knew how to stay ahead of the law. An arrest warrant for Dixon was issued by the New Rochelle City Court on November 14, 2022, charging him with murder. But it wasn't until March 8, 2024, that federal authorities issued a formal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. By that time, Dixon had already vanished into the anonymity of transient life, using the gaps between jurisdictions to his advantage. Federal agents believe he may have relied on a network of acquaintances or hidden communities to stay out of sight. Despite tracing his movements through transit records and reviewing hours of surveillance, the FBI remained one step behind, never quite catching up. To date, there has been no trial. Without Dixon in custody, the legal system has been unable to proceed. His case sits in limbo, a pending matter waiting for a suspect who continues to elude capture. The courts remain ready and the charges are active, but the central figure is missing. No opportunity has arisen for a defense. No victim's family has yet had the chance to see justice served in a courtroom. A reward of up to $10,000, 0 cents, has been offered for information that leads to his arrest, but tips so far have led nowhere. Authorities warn that Dixon should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. His demonstrated willingness to use violence without hesitation, combined with his ability to disappear, makes him a continuing threat to public safety. Until he is apprehended, he remains a lethal presence in the shadows, an invisible danger that refuses to fade. Ricky Vargas had long walked the razor's edge between chaos and control. For years, he operated in neighborhoods where fear replaced law, where guns were currency and silence was survival. His criminal history, though largely unspoken, hinted at a man used to confrontation, someone who didn't flinch when things turned violent. Those who lived near him might have suspected his capacity for brutality, but few could have imagined the sheer horror of what would eventually unfold. What began as a pattern of aggression and intimidation escalated into something far darker, culminating in a crime that left an entire community in shock. Vargas is officially charged with first-degree murder, causing grievous bodily harm, fleeing the scene of a violent crime, and unlawful possession of a firearm. But those charges barely scratched the surface. According to federal investigators, the murder he committed was not in the heat of passion or self-defense. It was a cold, calculated execution. The victim was targeted, the setting chosen, the firearm unregistered and illegal, was kept not as a protective measure but as a tool for asserting dominance. The bullet was not fired by accident. It was deliberate, final, and absolute. Witness accounts suggest the incident lasted only seconds, but those seconds were enough to extinguish a life and change the course of Vargas's future. What's most alarming is what happened immediately afterward. Within minutes of the shooting, Vargas vanished. Surveillance cameras in the area failed to capture any usable footage. No cars were seen speeding away. No witnesses reported his exit. There were no fingerprints, no personal items left behind, nothing that could provide even the most basic clue as to where he had gone. The speed and cleanliness of his disappearance sent a clear message. This wasn't improvised. This was a man who knew how to disappear and who had perhaps rehearsed such a scenario long before the crime ever took place. The FBI launched a nationwide manhunt, mobilizing resources to track any hint of Vargas's presence. Tips flooded in from across the country, Arizona, Texas, even Mexico. Each tip was followed, each location swept, but every trail went cold. It was as if Vargas had evaporated into thin air. Some agents began to suspect he was receiving help. The lack of movement on his bank accounts, the absence of digital activity, the complete silence from his known associates, all pointed to an infrastructure built to shield him. He might be hiding among people who fear him too much to speak, or in communities where his past connections still run deep. With every passing day, the urgency intensifies. Vargas is no longer just a name on a file. He is now on the FBI's most wanted list. This isn't symbolic. It is a declaration of the danger he poses and the lengths to which federal law enforcement is prepared to go to capture him. The violence he unleashed wasn't accidental or circumstantial. It was a conscious decision. His life is a series of deliberate acts that reveal a man fully committed to a path of destruction. He has rejected the law, scorned justice, and made it clear that he will not surrender willingly. No trial has taken place. Without a suspect in custody, the courts can do nothing. The victim's family has received no closure. The system stands frozen, awaiting the one piece of the puzzle that remains missing: Vargas himself. There is no conviction, no sentence, no moment of accountability, only an open warrant and a promise that the hunt will not stop until he is found. Until then, he remains an active threat, capable of more violence and dangerously comfortable in the shadow. Cindy Rodriguez Singh does not fit the image that most people associate with a violent fugitive. In photos, she appears composed, perhaps even warm, someone who might greet neighbors with a smile or attend a child's school event. But that image, once benign, has since become unrecognizable in the shadow of what she is accused of. Her name is now linked to one of the most horrifying allegations imaginable: the murder of a child under the age of 10. It is a crime that shocks the conscience, a tragedy so deep that the details have been deliberately withheld from the public. Investigators have refused to disclose specifics, a move that usually signals a level of brutality or trauma too extreme to expose openly. This silence is not the result of oversight, but a conscious effort to protect what little dignity remains for the victim and their family. The case has drawn national attention not just because of the nature of the crime, but because of what happened next. Cindy didn't just deny the charges, she vanished. In the aftermath of the child's death, she slipped away from every system designed to track her. There were no travel records, no border crossings, no credit card usage. Phone numbers went inactive. No friends or relatives reported contact. No sightings were confirmed. It was as though she had erased herself from existence, and that in itself was terrifying. For someone to disappear so completely, so quickly, suggested planning. It suggested intent. And above all, it suggested that she knew she was guilty. The FBI immediately opened a federal case. Special agents reviewed hours of surveillance footage, followed leads in multiple states, and reached out to communities where she had once lived. But they found nothing. No one had seen her. No one had spoken to her. And for those who might have known where she went, fear seemed to outweigh loyalty. Authorities now believe she is alive and has assumed a new identity, living quietly in a neighborhood where no one questions her past. With altered hair, false documents, and a changed demeanor, she could be anyone: a cashier, a nanny, a tenant in an apartment complex. And that is what makes her so dangerous. She is not hiding in the shadows. She could be hiding in plain sight. There has been no trial, no courtroom testimony, no moment of reckoning. Without a defendant, the legal system is frozen. The victim's family has received no justice, no explanation, and no closure. Their grief remains suspended in time, as raw and unresolved as the day she vanished. There is no sentence to review, no appeal to consider. There is only an open warrant and a hope that one day she will be found. A crime of this magnitude demands accountability, not just for the sake of law, but for the sake of humanity. Cindy Rodriguez Singh is not just a suspect on paper. She is a person accused of betraying the most sacred bond of trust, the protection of a child. Her continued freedom is a wound left open, and every day she remains at large is another day justice is denied. Until she is captured and brought before a court, she will remain one of the most haunting figures on the FBI's most wanted list, a living symbol of innocence stolen and truth buried beneath silence. Eugene Palmer is often imagined as an aging man living deep in the woods of New York, a silent figure perhaps walking through the underbrush, blending into the natural surroundings. But that image, quiet, benign, even frail, is deceptive. Behind this outward appearance is a man accused of one of the most infamous murders in recent memory. Palmer, once just another resident of Rockland County, now holds a place among the FBI's most wanted, not because of his age or background, but because of what he allegedly did on a September morning in 2012. On September 24th of that year, the quiet community of Stony Point was shattered by gunfire. The victim was Tammy Palmer, Eugene's daughter-in-law. According to the police report, she was gunned down just outside her home, suffering fatal wounds before emergency services could arrive. The motive for the killing remains largely speculative. Some suggest years of personal animosity between Eugene and his daughter-in-law. Others hint at a family dispute that had reached an irreparable point. But what is known with certainty is that Tammy Palmer died at the scene and that Eugene Palmer vanished almost immediately afterward. Law enforcement responded quickly, setting up search teams to comb the nearby woods and property surrounding Palmer's home. It was widely believed that he had fled into the vast wooded areas near his residence, areas he was intimately familiar with from years of hunting and hiking. These were not just forests to him, they were a personal refuge, perhaps even a premeditated escape route. Despite extensive ground and aerial searches, no trace of him was found. There were no footprints, no clothing left behind, no sightings from neighbors. It was as though he had simply stepped into the wilderness and melted away. The following year, in June 2013, the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York issued a federal arrest warrant for Palmer. The charge was unlawful flight to avoid prosecution for the murder of his daughter-in-law. This elevated the search from a local manhunt to a nationwide fugitive case. Over the years, tips have trickled in, some suggesting he had died in the forest, others insisting he had been secretly relocated and was living under the radar, possibly supported by friends or extended family. Yet no confirmed sighting has ever led to his capture. Authorities have even explored the possibility that he may be receiving help from individuals who either sympathize with him or fear reprisal if they reveal his location. The case has never reached trial. With no suspect in custody, the wheels of justice remain stalled. Tammy Palmer's family has had to live for over a decade without closure, knowing the man accused of killing her is still free. There has been no courtroom confrontation, no sentencing, no formal resolution. As time passes, the frustration deepens, not because of Eugene Palmer's age, but because of the silence that surrounds his disappearance. The notion that someone can commit such a violent act and then live comfortably in hiding, shielded by isolation or loyalty, stands in direct defiance of justice. Eugene Palmer remains on the FBI's most wanted list. Whether he is hiding in the same woods he once hunted or living under a different identity entirely, his freedom is a symbol of unfinished business. Until he is captured and brought before a judge, the case remains a painful reminder that age does not erase accountability and time does not absolve guilt. To the outside world, Robert William Fisher was the embodiment of an American ideal. Family man, Navy veteran, hardworking provider, and friendly neighbor in the quiet suburbs of Scottsdale, Arizona. He lived with his wife Mary and their 2 young children in a modest home, and those who knew them described the Fishers as an ordinary if somewhat reserved family. Fisher was known to attend church, keep to himself, and work diligently to support his household. But beneath that composed exterior, something far more sinister was simmering. On the morning of April 3, 2001, that calm suburban life was obliterated in an explosion that would shake the community and eventually the entire country. At 8:42 a.m., a gas explosion ripped through the Fisher residence. The house was engulfed in flames, and by the time emergency services arrived, it was already too late to save anyone inside. After the fire was extinguished, firefighters made a grim discovery. The charred remains of Mary Fisher and the couple's 2 children were found in what was once a bedroom. Initial assumptions pointed to a tragic accident, but investigators quickly realized this was no accident. Autopsies revealed that Mary had been shot in the head and the children had their throats slashed. The explosion had been intentionally set, likely to destroy evidence and obscure the timeline of the murders. The primary suspect was immediately clear: Robert William Fisher. But by the time authorities made the connection, he was gone. In the hours following the explosion, Fisher disappeared without a trace. His car, a white Toyota 4Runner, was later discovered abandoned in a remote area of the Tonto National Forest. Inside the vehicle were camping supplies and personal belongings, but no sign of Fisher himself. The vehicle's proximity to rugged, mountainous terrain led investigators to believe that he might have escaped into the wilderness, an environment he was familiar with due to his background in survival training and hunting. Despite extensive searches by law enforcement, including helicopters, ground teams, and scent tracking dogs, no physical evidence of Fisher was found in the area. Some believed he had died in the forest, while others suggested he might have faked his death and fled the country. Over time, the theories expanded, that he had altered his appearance, assumed a new identity, and possibly found refuge in isolated communities or even foreign nations. The FBI, however, maintained that Fisher was alive. The calculated nature of the crime and his sudden disappearance pointed not to a desperate man acting in panic, but to someone who had meticulously planned his escape. The legal system has remained on standby. With no body, no confirmed sightings, and no arrest, there has been no trial. Robert Fisher remains one of the longest-standing fugitives on the FBI's most wanted list. A federal arrest warrant was issued shortly after the murders, charging him with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, as well as multiple counts of first-degree murder and arson. But to this day, he has never faced a courtroom, never answered for the lives he is accused of taking, and never been forced to explain why he destroyed the very family he once vowed to protect. The case is still open. Fisher's face has been featured on wanted posters, news broadcasts, and documentaries for over 2 decades. Each year, tips come in and agents follow up, but none have led to his capture. His continued absence haunts both the investigators who have spent their careers pursuing him and the loved ones left behind. Until Robert William Fisher is found and brought to justice, the murders of Mary Fisher and her children remain a painful reminder of how even the most ordinary facade can conceal unimaginable horror. David Anthony Durham is not simply a fugitive. He is the embodiment of sustained chaos. Unlike others who committed a single crime and vanished, Durham's descent into violence was drawn out, volatile, and relentless. The entire ordeal began with one shot, a bullet fired at a law enforcement officer during what was initially a routine traffic stop. But that was only the beginning. What followed was an eruption of violence that seemed to have no limit. Over the course of a short but intense period, Durham unleashed a wave of aggression, terrorizing both law enforcement and the public. His actions went far beyond a moment of panic or desperation. They were systematic, sustained, and suggestive of a man who no longer recognized the authority of the law or the value of human life. The official charges against him paint a grim picture. Durham faces multiple counts of attempted murder, first and second-degree assault, and resisting arrest. He is accused of attacking officers who were responding to the scene and continuing his rampage long after the initial confrontation. He faces 12 separate counts of unlawful use of a weapon, each one tied to a moment when he reportedly fired at individuals or into public spaces. In addition, he has been charged with 10 counts of making criminal threats, often directed at law enforcement personnel and bystanders, and 9 counts of attempted assault with a deadly weapon. His reckless driving through populated areas added another layer of danger, turning public roads into battlegrounds and placing countless civilians at risk. He was not targeting any one person or group. He was striking out at the structure of order itself. As local police tried to contain the situation, Durham vanished. His disappearance was as sudden as it was perplexing. One moment, he was engaged in direct confrontations with officers. The next, he was gone. Many believe he fled into the dense forests of Oregon, terrain that provides ample cover for someone familiar with the landscape. Despite extensive manhunts involving helicopters, drones, and search dogs, no trace of him was ever found. Some investigators theorize that he may have been wounded during the firefight and succumbed to his injuries in the wilderness. Others suggest he was aided by someone, perhaps a sympathizer, or someone too intimidated to say no, who helped him escape and remain hidden. The FBI took over the case and issued a federal warrant for his arrest. His face was added to the most wanted list, not merely for the number of charges he faces, but for the sheer level of danger he represents. Unlike fugitives who hide quietly, Durham's history suggests that if confronted, he would react violently. That uncertainty, that persistent threat of escalation, makes him one of the most dangerous individuals at large today. The passage of time has not dulled his profile. If anything, it has made the situation more precarious. Each year that goes by without his capture is another year where the possibility of another violent episode looms. No court has had the opportunity to hear his case. No judge has delivered a sentence. No victims have seen justice. The legal system stands ready, but without Durham in custody, it remains powerless. Until he is found, the charges against him are merely ink on paper, and the danger he represents remains unchecked. He is not just a name on a wanted poster, he is a walking threat, and his evasion of justice is a stark reminder of how fragile public safety can be when violence is allowed to vanish into the wilderness. Josephine Sunshine Overacre's name may evoke an image of light, peace, or even beauty, but that image is a dangerous illusion. Behind the name lies a long history of fire, destruction, and radical extremism. She is not just a sympathizer of environmental causes, she is, according to the FBI, one of the most committed and dangerous members of a network that turned environmental activism into domestic terrorism. For years, Josephine is believed to have helped orchestrate a series of coordinated arson attacks targeting symbols of industrial development. Buildings were set ablaze, vehicles were destroyed, energy infrastructure, some of it critical to the functioning of entire regions, was damaged or reduced to rubble. These weren't random acts of vandalism. They were deliberate assaults designed to send a message through flames. Investigators link Josephine to numerous incidents across the United States, including attacks on timber facilities, SUV dealerships, government property, and energy plants. The common thread in these attacks was the intention to cripple industries seen by radicals as harmful to the environment. But while the rhetoric surrounding these actions was couched in ecological concern, the reality was far more dangerous. Many of the arson attempts occurred at night, when employees or security personnel might have been on site. Several fires spread faster than anticipated, threatening nearby residential areas. Firefighters were placed at risk. Bystanders were endangered. What Josephine and her associates framed as protest was, in the eyes of law enforcement, nothing less than calculated domestic sabotage. According to federal agents, Josephine played more than just a peripheral role. She is believed to have been a key planner, helping to develop strategies, assign roles, and oversee logistics. She didn't merely ignite flames, she helped build the system that sustained them. Evidence collected over the years, including testimonies from captured accomplices, physical traces at fire sites, and recovered communications, has consistently pointed to her as a central figure in a wider network of eco-extremists. Her ability to operate for so long without capture has frustrated law enforcement and drawn attention from counterterrorism experts who view her case as a striking example of how ideology can mutate into long-term violence. Despite years of pursuit, Josephine remains at large. Authorities suspect she may have fled the country, possibly finding refuge in parts of Europe or South America where sympathetic communities might shield her. Others believe she never left the United States and instead lives in one of the many secluded communes or alternative communities where people live off the grid and shun government oversight. She is wherever she is. She has remained silent. No public messages, no claims of responsibility, no appearance in activist circles for nearly 2 decades. This silence, however, has not erased the memory of her actions. No court has ever had the opportunity to weigh the evidence against her. No trial has been conducted, no sentence has been passed. The justice system remains frozen, held hostage by her absence. The FBI continues to pursue her as an active fugitive, offering rewards and following leads, but she has proven elusive. Her legacy, at least for now, is a trail of scorched earth and unanswered questions. While some may still try to romanticize her cause, the facts remain clear. Josephine Sunshine Overacre is wanted not for her ideals, but for her crimes. The poetic ring of her name is now overshadowed by what she left behind: smoke, ruin, and the constant threat of repetition. Until she is found, that threat remains alive. At first glance, Omar Alexander Cardenas could be mistaken for just another young man blending into the rhythm of city life, unassuming, composed, and entirely forgettable. But beneath this ordinary exterior lies a far darker identity, one that has placed him among the FBI's most wanted fugitives. Cardenas is suspected of committing a murder that shook the community where it occurred, and then vanishing so completely that federal authorities still have not been able to determine his current whereabouts. Though the official charge is unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, the case itself is layered with far more serious implications, suggesting calculated violence and possible gang involvement. The murder for which Cardenas is being sought was not a spontaneous act of rage, nor the tragic result of a misunderstanding. According to investigators, it was likely a targeted execution, planned, deliberate, and carried out with precision. The victim, though not publicly named in most FBI communications, is believed to have been marked for reasons that may involve criminal associations, territorial disputes, or other forms of organized retaliation. The possibility that this murder was linked to gang activity raises the stakes significantly. These kinds of killings are often meant to send a message, an assertion of dominance, a warning to rivals, or a way to eliminate perceived threats without leaving room for negotiation. What makes Cardenas especially dangerous is not only the crime itself, but the speed and effectiveness with which he vanished. He disappeared shortly after the shooting, and law enforcement has struggled to track him ever since. No confirmed sightings, no communication, no financial or digital activity. Some reports suggest he may have fled across the U.S.-Mexico border shortly after the murder. Others believe he could be living under an alias, supported by individuals within a criminal network that benefits from keeping him hidden. The FBI has been tight-lipped about the finer details of the case, a silence that typically reflects high operational sensitivity. When authorities release so little information, it often means they are dealing with a case that could compromise informants, ongoing investigations, or undercover agents. Despite years of searching, Cardenas has managed to evade capture. His face is plastered across wanted bulletins and digital databases, yet he has slipped through every netcast to bring him in. His ability to remain hidden, even in an age of mass surveillance and facial recognition, points to a level of support and premeditation that goes far beyond what most fugitives have. There is no indication that he has tried to turn himself in, and no evidence that he regrets his act. Instead, his continued evasion of justice only underscores the threat he still poses. There has been no arrest, no trial, and no verdict. The victim's family continues to wait for justice, and law enforcement remains on high alert. Until Omar Cardenas is apprehended, the case remains open and dangerous. He is more than just a face on a poster or a line in a case file. He is a person capable of calculated violence, supported by a network of silence, and willing to cross borders to protect his freedom. His continued absence is not just a failure of capture, it is an unresolved danger. As long as he remains free, the possibility of further violence remains real. Brian James' Wedding is not the man who pulls the trigger, but the one who decides who should die. He is not the courier who smuggles drugs across borders, but the mastermind who coordinates entire supply chains. He is, in the eyes of law enforcement, the architect of a vast criminal enterprise, one that stretches across countries, operates through coded communication and layers of intermediaries, and feeds off the misery of addiction, fear, and profit. Wedding's name has surfaced repeatedly in major investigations involving international drug trafficking, particularly cocaine exports, as well as in cases involving contract killings tied to territorial control and enforcement of loyalty within the syndicate. He is officially charged with participating in a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, conspiracy to export narcotics, murder connected to drug trafficking, and attempted murder in furtherance of the same goals. These are not small-scale offenses. They reflect a man who sits at the highest levels of organized crime, directing the flow of drugs and orchestrating violence with strategic precision. Testimonies from former associates, confidential informants, and intercepted communications point to a central truth. Wedding was not simply involved. He was the one giving the orders, approving hits, signing off on shipments, and ensuring that every cog in the machine ran without resistance. The network he helped build was sophisticated and ruthless. Front companies, offshore accounts, encrypted messaging apps, and layers of loyal enforcers allowed the organization to operate almost invisibly. When low-level operatives were arrested, they had little to offer investigators. Wedding insulated himself with buffers and rarely appeared in person to discuss major deals. His name, however, kept returning in connection to major busts, massive seizures of cocaine at shipping ports, the disappearance of rival traffickers, and targeted assassinations of those suspected of cooperation with authorities. Over time, his influence became undeniable. He was not just a criminal, he was a businessman of the underground economy, profiting from human suffering and maintaining power through brutality and control. When authorities finally moved in to arrest him, Wedding had already vanished. Early reports speculated that he had fled to Latin America, possibly to a country with limited extradition treaties, or where corrupt officials could offer protection. But later intelligence suggested otherwise. Some believe he never left the United States and may now be living under a false identity, shielded by those who still benefit from the empire he helped create. His ability to disappear despite being at the center of multiple investigations highlights not just his cunning, but the extent of his resources and the loyalty or fear he still commands. No trial has taken place, no judge has heard the full story, no sentence has been handed down. The justice system waits, frozen by his absence. The FBI continues its search, recognizing that so long as Wedding remains free, the network he helped construct remains a living threat. Every day he is not behind bars is a day the machinery of drug violence and corruption may continue to operate in the shadows. Capturing Ryan James Wedding is not just about punishing one man, it is about dismantling an entire system built on blood, greed, and silence. Until that happens, justice remains incomplete. These 10 cases show how serious a threat wanted criminals pose to society. Each of them committed a crime that affected people's lives, destroyed families, and undermined the sense of security. Their stories are a reminder of how important it is not only to have justice, but also to have constant interaction between society and the state in the fight against crime. As long as these people are at large, the hunt continues, and any information could be crucial.